Okay, totally technical operator error. So, hi, Paul Sterling here. I'm the author of this best-selling book, Argue Less, Love More. I'm here today to talk to you about loving courageously, one of, as I said, my favorite topics, and it's also one of the most challenging topics. There are some things that you get to do in your life, and once you've done them, they're done. It's all set. You don't have to worry about it. And there are other things that are a constant choice and a challenge. And courage and love is that to me. Courage is a constant challenge, a muscle to be built. And we're going to dive into that, how to do it, what stops us from loving courageously, what we can do when we're stuck in a rut and we're not loving courageously. So what I'd love to do is make this as interactive as possible so that it doesn't feel like I'm talking to myself on the computer screen. I'd love to hear who you are, where you're from, and where do you have the biggest challenges when it comes to love and courage. So let's dive in a little bit here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about three main areas. So how many of you, and this is, like I said, interactive, so response, I love it. So how many of you here would love to be courageous, loving courageously all the time, or loved courageously all the time? So most of us say yes, that's what we'd like. We'd like to both love courageously and be loved courageously. So what gets in the way? What are the triggers? And I had this conversation, and so this morning with one of my brilliant roommates here at the house, Don, and these are some of the notes, and I updated this presentation based on my notes from this morning. So this today is going to be it's a deep dive into an uncomfortable, challenging topic. And if you are someone who wants to master love or on the process of mastering love, you're in the right place. And if you're someone who gets uncomfortable easy and only wants to do things that are nice and cozy and warm and fuzzy, this is probably the wrong place. And I'm going to get into what courage is too. And so let's dive in a little bit. Here are the three possible areas that we can look at. When we get, oops, come on, machine. And we get triggered. And see, the important thing here when it comes to love, and hi, Phil, how are you doing? Upstate New York. And I need a courage boost. There we go. Phil, thank you so much. Yes, I just was very close to you. I was just in Vermont yesterday in Essex Junction, right next to Burlington, with my family. And this right now seems to be a time. Let me switch back over here. It seems to be a time when we could all use a boost in our courage. Um, it's it's a challenging, scary time, and it's putting much more stress on relationships than almost any time in our history. Uh, so this is a chance to deal with it. And part of when we need the courage the most is when we get triggered. So it's easy to be courageous when there's nothing to be afraid about. The challenge is when we get triggered and upset, where do we go? And this is when we feel resourceful. So what we're trying to do is get up to the resourceful place and watch out for the reactive place. And this right down here is what I call the trauma drama line. And I've had some of my loyal listeners say I should learn how to spell better. I totally agree with them, and it hasn't happened yet. So I'm sure that that's actually not the right way to spell trauma. I will give it a second shot here. Trauma, something like that. The trauma drama line, we're reactive, and there's several places we can go. We can go to collapse, we can go to combative. So I want to give you a story of that and then talk to you about how that ties into relationships. Because the patterns that we learn as a kid, unless we unlearn them, they're going to stay with us sometimes for a lifetime. So a pattern I learned in my family was my older brother. Well, when I look at this, my older brother was the combative one, and he had to win at all costs. And I'll give you an example of that. Now, this is young boys. My poor mom, who I was just with, just had her 90th birthday, and almost every time I'm back with her, I apologize for us growing up. But we were three boys. We fought all the time. My older brother, well, one time we got in a fight, and I gave him a bloody nose. And it's going to sound odd for a guy who teaches peace and all. And for a moment, as a young boy, it's like I went, wow, I felt that I could defend myself. I felt powerful. And he got that. He must have seen it in my eyes. And he beat me afterwards. He beat me until I collapsed. Now, what has this got to do with relationships? Everything. Now, if we're not in a relationship with physical violence, a lot of us came from physical violence, abuse, maybe molested, rape, all these things. So when we get triggered, where do we go? Do we go to collapse? Do we go to combative? Or do we go to courageous? Now, these are the automatic. These are the auto. And what I want you to ask yourself is, which one do you go on autopilot? Do you go to collapse? Do you go to combative? Most people don't go to courageous on autopilot. This is a choice. You have to choose this. This is like a muscle that needs to be built to get to be courageous. So I guess the first thing is, what do you want in your relationship? Do you want collapse communication? And I'm 6'3" now, 230 pounds. And in a recent relationship, I noticed that still under pressure, when I got reactive, a lot of times what would happen is I would collapse. Why? Because it's a pattern that was built in. And sometimes we don't get over our patterns. We learn how to work with them. So I'm working with my collapse, and when I get aware of it, I move towards choice. But to move towards choice takes a lot of courage. And what am I choosing? I'm choosing choosing to be courageous, choosing to be compassionate, choosing to be vulnerable. Now, my brother didn't feel like he had a choice. He had to win. I had to lose. That's the way it went growing up. And he never really got to the place where he got to be courageous. Now, there was a semi-happy ending to this story, in that at one point he came up to Alaska and was, at that point I had left home, get as far away from home as possible, became a commercial fisherman in Alaska, became captain of a 58-foot steel boat, and he came up and worked for me, and our whole relationship shifted. And I was no longer collapsed. I was no longer combative with him. I was courageous, and he saw me in a very different way. And when that happens, when you behave that way in a relationship, your whole relationship changes. I'm going to talk about that in a second. So today, what tonight is about today is how do we move over here to being courageous and vulnerable. Because Brene Brown, and if you haven't watched Brene Brown, watch YouTube, but Brene Brown talks about the opposite side of courage is vulnerability. Wow. We're getting some posts here that aren't appropriate for our little group. Anyway. Oh, jeez. I was trying to delete it, and instead I showed it on the group. All right. So I'm back with you all. I'm trying to block our little user who's posting stuff that's ridiculous. All right. So here we go, diving in. Looking at what I'm talking about today, is this about information or transformation? When you think about information, we've never had more information. We've never had more info on the web or any place. And if I clicked in diet advice, there's 26,900,000 hits. When I click in relationship advice, 94,800,000 hits. So there's tons of information, and relationships have never been in worse shape than right now. There's a relationship tends to be, and one of my mentors and teachers, a guy named Tony Robbins, talked about something like this. This is what I got inspired from. He said, something like life is this tug of war between what you want the most and what you fear the most. And I thought about it. I said, wow, that's a lot like relationships. Your relationships are a tug of war between what you want the most and what you fear the most. And so to be courageous, you live over here in the world of possibility, what you want to attract and what you desire. And what comes with it is your fears, the things you want to avoid, your limitations, your doubts. And this relationship is a dance between those two things. And it takes, as Phil said earlier, it takes a courage boost on a regular basis to be living in this world between these two places. So let's look at how we're doing. When it comes to relationships, how are we doing? Well, right now, this was before the pandemic, but every year there was between 876,000 and 1 million divorces between every year. Every 31 to 36 seconds, there was a divorce. The average divorce cost $30,000. That's $26 billion a year. But the real damage is the impact to friends, family, self-esteem, lost hopes, productivity, heartbreak. So what is, well, actually, let me just ask, can you relate to that? If you can relate, let me know. Just send me your comment in there if you can relate to that or not. And now I want to ask you even a tougher question. And I can see you out there in Facebook land. I can see, actually, I'm making up that I can see you, but how many of you, or who has ever had their heart broken? Who has had their heart broken more than once, twice, three times? Who? I've had my heart broken many times, including recently. I'm a relationship and intimacy coach, and just went through a incredibly painful breakup. So you know, the way I look at that is I get some understanding of that from the people who climb Mount Everest. The people who climb to Mount Everest, not everybody, but a lot of the best climbers in the world, they can be totally prepared, they can be totally trained, they have all the equipment, and every once in a while the mountain will still kick their ass. And I have been doing this for 25 years. I have been in the trenches. I work with couples from around the world on a regular basis. And still, there are times when my willingness and my ability to be courageous and to be vulnerable get tested. And recently they got tested. And, you know, I go back to Phil, who started us out with that needs a courage boost. And yeah, I think we all need that right now. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And I've had my heart broken more than once. And why I say that is it's such an act of courage to be willingly vulnerable again, to be courageously vulnerable once you've had your heart broken. So I want to dive into that and go through that. And if you can relate, you know, just hit the thumbs up or whatever it is that you want. So I'm going to give you not my story of courage. I'll give you that too, but this is from one of my clients from New York, Linda. And when she came to me, basically she was wondering if it was over and used this as a last ditch effort. And I'm talking about there had been betrayals, lies, affairs, all sorts of horrendously painful stuff had happened in her relationship. And so she came to me and she was feeling hopeless and alienated in her marriage. She wondered if it was over and used this as her last ditch effort. She came away feeling empowered, hopeful. The future is wide open and we get to choose from awareness, not pain. And this was from, I think, 4 or 5 years ago, maybe more. And they're still together. So it wasn't a quick fix. It was hard work. It was a deep dive. And she did it, and it transformed her. And part of what I want to talk about is that to get a result, what you need is the tools. And a lot of times what people don't have, if they don't have effective tools, they don't get the results they want. So I am going to tell you a quick story about having an effective tool. I was working in teaching nonviolent communication, which is the foundation of what I teach. I was teaching it in jail in Golden, Colorado, and I would work with minimum to maximum security inmates. And I also taught some of the staff there at the jail, the counselors. And I was on my way to teach one day, and I had breakfast, and I had bacon for breakfast, and I had a piece of bacon stuck in my teeth. And I was driving along. I don't have one of them here. I was driving along, and for like a half an hour, I was trying to get out with my tongue, and I kept trying to ignore it, couldn't ignore it. Tried my fingernail just kind of wedged it in there deeper. Got a business card out, took the business card, wedged the business card in there. It got wet and it broke off in my teeth. So now I had wet business card and I had bacon stuck in my teeth. Now, what's this got to do with relationships? Everything. So if you think about it, I'd love your answer. What was the right tool? What tool did I need to get the bacon out? So if you could just type that in, that would be awesome. And I'll keep going because it takes a second to see your post. So after about a half an hour of trying everything that didn't work, it would be easy to say, well, that bacon's stuck. It's never going to get out because I don't have the right tool. So I pulled over and I got out a what? I found a toothpick. Now, this is not the toothpick. It's just an example toothpick. Toothbrush or toothpick. Thank you, Phil. Anyway, how long does it take with the right tool? Well, I have been working with it uncomfortably, awkwardly for over a half an hour. And with the right tool, it probably took 3 seconds. Now, the problem with most relationships is they don't have a great set of tools. They don't have tools that bring you closer. They have tools that drive you away. Or when there's an upset, tend to make things worse. So let's start with diving into what is courage, because today is about loving courageously. And so I want to go into what's courageous. And see, there's no courage without fear and vulnerability. And as Brene Brown said, vulnerability is a combination of risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure. And how much fun does that sound like? So almost everybody likes having courage. Very few people like having the risk, the uncertainty, the emotional exposure. And when you love somebody, that is one of the most challenging places because your heart is at risk. You're uncertain about the future and you have tons of emotional exposure. And as one of my guest speakers and a great mentor and coach, Allison Armstrong, said, nothing great ever happens in a relationship until somebody gets vulnerable. And from Matt Damon in the movie We Bought a Zoo, and it's a great sort of love story, healing story, family story. Great to, if you have kids, to watch it with them. But he's sitting down with his son, and his son is a little heartbroken. He's learning about girls, and it seems like no matter what he does it wrong. And he's there with his dad, and Matt Damon says, sometimes all you need is 20 seconds of insane courage. Just literally 20 seconds of embarrassing bravery. And I promise you, something great will come of it. And the last one is Brene Brown going, choose courage over comfort. And that's what it takes in this world. It takes choosing courage over comfort. By the way, I have I'm writing on my little iPad over here and reading from it. So it's odd. I look here and then look back over here. So, oops. Here we go. We all get triggered. So the times that we get tested, so triggered, another word could be tested. We all get tested. We have all these triggers that run in relationships: vulnerability, fear, jealousy, communication issues are broken. Our needs aren't being met. And can we ask to get our needs met? And as the emotions go up, our intelligence goes down. And what we need to help us through this is courage. So what do you do with your pain, your heartbreak, your vulnerability? Do you lean in and keep your heart open? Or do you lean out and protect yourself and armor up. And I'll tell you what I learned from my dad, Irish alcoholic, recovering Catholic. He was great in a lot of areas of his life. He was courageous in most areas and capable. And when it came to vulnerability, though, boy, that was a weak spot for him. And I learned to shut down. I learned to withdraw. I learned to armor up. And so if I can teach, and if I can live, not just teach, but if I can live courageous vulnerability, almost anybody can. And I'm going to tell you, early on, I left home at age 17 to become a fisherman in Alaska. I wanted to get as far away as I could from my older brother and my dad. So Alaska seemed like as far away as you can go from Vermont. And the challenge is I had already been trained by my dad, and one of his things he used to say is the best defense is a strong offense. And I learned how to be an offensive communicator. And when you're an offensive communicator, what happens, it's the opposite of being courageous. It looks like this. When we communicate in a way that neither of us end up feeling heard, understood, or valued. And the harder we try, the worse it gets, because our communication often comes out as an attack of what they should or shouldn't do. And we end up tripping each other's triggers. And as we do that, our communication gets worse and worse and less vulnerable and less courageous. And it leaves us both feeling like there's constant conflict. The trust is eroded. There's a lack of intimacy, and it can take us weeks or months to recover, or never at all. And with Corrine, who was my wife, we were together for about 18 years. And there's some shame in even saying this, but boy, I sucked when it came to courageous vulnerability. When I got my heart broken, when I got my feelings hurt, what I would do is withhold love, energy, affection, attention, and I basically tried to punish my partner into better behavior. And it didn't work, never will work, doesn't work, but it's a lot easier, see, because when I do that, I don't have to be courageous. I can just be angry and complaining. And so how much fun is it to be with someone who's doing that? I would love to hear your comments on that. So let me move up to the tools here. When you are courageous, what happens is you slow down and you communicate in a way that both of you feel heard, understood, and valued. And you stop being defensive. And what happens is when you can do that, you can meet triggers with courage and compassion and curiosity. It actually takes courage to be compassionate. It takes courage to be curious. Your partner's triggered and you're going, tell me more. Wow, so when I did that, you were really scared or upset or got jealous. And see, one thing you can do, like when somebody gets jealous, you can get defensive and attack back and say, well, you did this or I did this, or you can lean in and go, wow, so you felt really scared. And I'm wondering if you're needing some reassurance. I'm wondering if you're needing to be held right now. What's going on? Tell me more. And it transforms the whole interaction. And when you do that, you feel confident that you know how to repair upsets and misunderstandings. And it's interesting, I was a whitewater kayaker for years in Colorado, and the thing that I learned, which is, I wish I had one of my kayaking pictures. I didn't know I could tell this story. I got lots of them, but I just didn't put one up here. So whitewater kayaking, what's really critical is learning a roll, learning how to flip once you're upside down. It's called the roll or the Eskimo roll. And I often thought that what would make me feel braver is if I could go through class 4 or class 5 rapids without getting flipped upside down. And what actually made me feel more confident is one day I was going through a class 4 drop called the Disney Slide on the Poudre River in Colorado outside of Fort Collins. And I got flipped upside down and I was going up. I was upside down and backwards and I was headed for it's like a 5-foot falls drop with rocks. And so it was like my worst case scenario. I was about to go over backwards and upside down. And at the last second, I was able to roll over and recover. And I spun around, just literally the bow is spinning around just as I drop over the edge. And if you think about it, what has that got to do with relationships? Well, when I think about getting flipped upside down, I think about conflict in relationships. And I was brought up at some levels to avoid conflicts because they're dangerous, versus having the tools where I can lean into an upset, a misunderstanding, confusion, and be curious and courageous and compassionate and vulnerable. These are some of the tools and the muscles that need to be developed, and see that there's a real difference between what we talked about this morning. It's a difference between stages versus states. And a stage, like kids go through different stages and we don't expect them to go back to the terrible twos. There's a transformation, and when you've transformed, you don't go backwards. Now, it's not entirely true, but that's a general principle. But a state is a choice. You wake up every morning, you're going to be in one of two states. You can choose. Am I going to be in an excited, powerful, compassionate, courageous state, or am I going to be in a miserable state where I look at what's wrong with the world? Now, last couple of days, I've been a little bit on the what's wrong with the world miserable state, including on the flight yesterday where planes were delayed and missed. I literally missed the last shuttle of the night by a minute. I was walking up and I watched them drive by, and that was it for the night. And I'd already flown across the country. So I had to really work on my state. My state wanted to be a miserable state. And I had to do some mental gymnastics to get myself in a powerful state, go get a cab, get to my car. I didn't get home last night till 3:00 at night. So anyway, relationships. Get the tools so both of you feel heard, understood, valued. Meet each other. Meet the triggers, because we all get triggered. What we do with them is critical. Meet the triggers with compassion, courage, compassion, and curiosity. And when you do that, over time, what happens is right here, you feel confident that you know how to repair them, and you can lean in, and you're not trying to avoid them anymore. And that builds your communication. Well, your communication and the way you are builds trust and intimacy. And now what happens is you can rebound in minutes where it used to take hours, days, weeks. So we all get triggered. What are we going to do with it? Are we going to armor up? Are we going to lean in? Are we going to create a breakthrough where something becomes possible that wasn't possible before? And this isn't, what I'm telling you is what's possible here. This is a couple I work with actually in Exeter Junction, Vermont, which is where I just was. But after many attempts at couples work with other individuals, working with Paul has finally helped my partner and I break through to a new place of understanding and appreciation for each other. And what they learn, and this is a tool. I want to give you a tool that you can walk away with, that you can do something different with tonight. How many of you speak more than one language? If you speak, tell me how many languages. Just type in the comments how many languages you speak. 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's important because if you're speaking in one language and your partner speaking in another language, like for a while I dated someone who was from Brazil. She spoke Eu falo português, Portuguese. And so I was learning a little Portuguese so I could be in her, speak her language. Now, when it comes to communicating, and I see some people saying, well, 2 there. So I speak 1+. But when it comes to relationships, I speak 3 different languages. And so does everybody on this call. We speak the language of the head, the language of the heart, the language of the hurt. And it's just like if somebody speaks Spanish and somebody speaks English, if they don't understand each other, there's a great opportunity for misunderstandings to happen. And what I want to do is tell you, part of the time you're speaking from and you're also listening from. So when you're talking, are you talking about the logic, the love, or the loss? If you're talking about the logic, you're talking about thinking, understanding. What are the facts? What is this a language of vulnerability right here? Facts, figures, fault, right, wrong, knowledge is key. He who knows the most wins the most. Now, that was a language that we used a lot in my household growing up because vulnerability was looked upon as weakness. And so you can either speak with your head or you can also listen with your head. So you're listening for facts and figures. You don't care about feelings. Cross-cultural is, yeah, I hear cross-cultural is tricky, finding a human, I'm guessing that's a common language is important. Yeah, finding a common language. So this is what I'm trying to do here is help people find a common language. When you're speaking from your head and they're listening from their heart, it's going to sound like an odd conversation. Or when we're speaking from our heart and they're listening from their head, it's an odd conversation. Courageous conversations happen here. They happen when you are able to speak from your heart about love, connections, feelings, needs, requests. In this, vulnerability is key. Up here, when you're speaking from your head, vulnerability is weakness. And then there's the third one, where we're speaking from our hurt when we get triggered. So how many of you ever get triggered? I'm guessing everybody here gets triggered. And if you don't get triggered, you should be teaching the class rather than taking it. But when we're speaking from our hurt, what are we talking about? We're talking about who's the enemy, who's the ally, where's the danger, what do I need to feel safe right now? How can I protect myself? And again, vulnerability looks like the enemy. So the key here is if you want to have courageous vulnerability, it's spending time in your heart, getting out of your head and getting out of your hurt. And there's a big difference. And okay, this one is critical. What is it? It's critical. And it's going to sound, well, it's going to sound how it sounds. But there is a huge difference between, I want to make sure I say it the way that we wrote it down this morning. Oh, yeah. There is a huge difference between sweet sadness and sour suffering. Because we all get our feelings hurt. We go through, if you're in a relationship, you're going to go through some hurt. The question is, do you use it to beat up your partner and push them away and make them bad, stupid, and wrong? Or do you use it to create connection and healing? So sweet sadness, when Marshall Rosenberg, the creator of nonviolent communication, was telling me about it, it's like you lose your partner, you lose something that, and there's incredible pain. And sweet sadness, you can be grieving like crazy, sobbing and letting it go. You're going through it, you're feeling your feelings. But the sour suffering is when you're avoiding really feeling your feelings. All you're feeling is the feeling that it shouldn't have happened. They shouldn't have left. They shouldn't have done that. They shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have done this. So you're either, when you're in the sour suffering, there's a lot of blame, and it's easy to go there. I have such compassion for people who go there, and I go there too at times when I get triggered. And what I keep consciously leaning into and moving towards is the sweet sadness, the feeling of being with the loss. And hopefully this is making sense to you, the difference between sweet sadness and the silent suffering. And what happened when Jesse and July learned how to communicate from their heart and relate to each other, well, here's what she got. She got back a lot of her feminine power and went from feeling like he had all the power and final say to understanding he wanted to be her hero and make her happy. That she could use the "can you hear me now" communication process, which is based on nonviolent communication, to enter his world and really hear, understand, and value him. And how do you think it changed their dynamics? She no longer had to argue with him and fight with him because he wanted to be her hero and make her happy, and he felt heard, understood, and valued. It gave her more patience and confidence and compassion and connection with her lover. She was able to figure out which of the 10 needs which were causing most of her upsets. When your needs aren't getting met, they create a lot of pain in your relationship. So, and part of being vulnerable is knowing what your needs are and making vulnerable requests. A lot of times what happens is we make demands instead of requests. She stopped taking his masculinity personally and started to understand the differences between the sexes. And she got a clear on the power of her words. Whew. Now, when I talked to them, about 6 months after I'd worked with them, I got 2 or 3 pages of notes from each of them. I narrowed it down to a couple of key things. Here is what he got, or some of what he got. He stopped taking himself so seriously, started to have more fun in the relationship. He got to understand the differences between men and women in a way that was empowering for both of them. He saw sex as a great indicator of how connected they were, sort of the canary in the coal mine, to see whether the relationship was in good shape or not. And he loved that he was able to enter her world so that she felt heard, understood, and valued, and he felt like her hero. And he stopped worrying about what he said and became more interested in what she heard. This made a huge difference. I want to say that one again. He stopped worrying as much, anyway, about what he said and became very interested in what she heard. That is not the way people normally communicate. The last thing is he loved that they both became aware of using anything, any language that implies bad, stupid, wrong, BSW. Because what happens when we use that language, it shuts down. That language will shut down somebody's listening switch and they will stop listening to you. So that's what happens when people use bad, stupid, wrong. So what we're trying to do is keep communication. And for years, I was a corporate consultant. So when I say we're trying to keep communication above the line, the fault line is anything below this line. Our communication is all about bad, stupid, wrong. Who to blame. And when we communicate that way, we create a lot of, I call it the 3 R's: resistance, resentment, regret. And when something goes wrong, this is most people go through this sometimes really rapidly, sometimes very slowly. First thing that happens is there's denial. It didn't happen. Like if you look at the epidemic, how we have handled with it as a country and how a lot of countries handled it. First, there's denial, and there are a lot of people still in denial that it even is out there. It's a conspiracy theory, it's a whatever. And then after something goes wrong, then what do? We go from denial to laying blame. It's not my fault, it's somebody else's fault. We justify our behavior. And when justification doesn't happen, doesn't work, what do we feel? It's shame. And when we feel shame, we want to shut down and quit. And there's 2 types of quit. Now I'm going to tell you a quick story about quit. I was working for the city of Albuquerque. Most of their top management went through my courses on quality, productivity, and leadership. And you can say I'm somewhat heady. I have all of these slides. I'm giving you all of the stuff that's going on behind the scenes. And I would work with companies and corporations and government and teach them about quality, productivity, and leadership. And the leadership was about communication. Anyway, working with City Albuquerque, I go in, I'm interviewing people that work with the Parks Department. And sorry, I've got a crazy user on there sending weird stuff. Okay, so I'm working with the Parks Department. I interviewed one of the guys, and he says, well, I go, how is it going? He goes, not good. I said, tell me the story. He says, well, about a month ago, I came in, I was working really hard, and nobody noticed. And it was really heartbreaking. I was trying to contribute. I was trying to make a difference. Nobody noticed. And then what happened is I stopped trying to make a difference. I basically quit and kept showing up. And nobody noticed that either. So there's 2 types of quit. One is to quit and leave. And the other type is quit and what? Quit and stay. And the quit and leave is somebody who leaves a relationship. They go, well, this relationship sucks, but it could be better down the road, so I'm going to leave this relationship. The second group is the quit and stay. They think it sucks here, but they think it's probably going to suck just as much down the road, so I might as well just stay. And I've seen people that have been in relationships 10, 20, 30 years, and they quit years ago. They just stayed in it because they didn't figure it would be better anywhere else. So that's what's all below the line. Whose fault is it? Bad, stupid, wrong? This is the opposite of courageous communication. So when we get above the line, what we're looking about now is, what do we want to create? And this is the world of responsibility and accountability and accountability. I know that's not spelled right. Possibility. So I want to ask you, what world do you want to live in? And just type it in there. Do you want to live above or below the line? Which one do you want to work in? Which one do you want to live in? So if you could just type that in. I know in my world, I want to live above the line. Now, why that's a good thing or is because it's hard. It's not everybody does it. You look at our government, both sides, I'm not even going to go too far into it, both the Democrats and the Republicans spend an awful lot of time letting you know who's bad, stupid, wrong, letting you know who to blame, not my fault, it's everybody else's, and it's a shit show. So if you think about it, yes, it's too easy to live below the line. Yeah, it is. It's way too easy to live below the line. But see, that's where courage always is a choice. It's not like a transformation that you go through this transformation and you now are courageous. You go through the transformation, or it's a daily exercise. It's something that you do every day. And what I want you to think about is today, what results do you want in your relationship? And I'm guessing if you're on this call because you want some different results in your relationship, or you want to be in a relationship. Those are some new results. So what controls the results you get or don't get is the actions you take. And a lot of times people focus here, like, what can I do differently? And I love actions. That's really powerful. But what controls our actions is our beliefs. So our beliefs control our actions control our results, and our past results control our beliefs. Now, if we want to get something new in our life, what we have to do is create a new vision and make that vision stronger than our current results. And I'll give you an example about that. I think his name was Roger Bannister. But there was something in the world of athletes, and it was called the 4-minute mile. And ever since the Greeks and the Romans, they've been trying to run a 4-minute mile, and they thought it was impossible. And then one guy did it. And within a year, so for all of mankind's recorded history that we've been able to record a 4-minute mile, nobody been able to do it. One guy does it, and then within a year, I think another 16 or 20 people did it. Why? The first guy did it, Roger Bannister did it because he had a vision. He made the vision stronger than the old results. But then once somebody got it, their history changed everybody's beliefs about what was possible. So in creating a relationship that you want, you need to be able to change your beliefs, take new actions, produce new results. That's what I'm talking to you about today. In creating a vision, that vulnerability, and if you think about it, for a lot of people, vulnerability, growing up in my household, vulnerability, I'll just put vulner equals weakness. By the way, I'll just give you an example of vulnerability here. Me spelling in public, I can break out in a sweat. I'm dyslexic. I'm grammatically impaired. It's like the wires just don't work as well in my brain. And because I'm committed to getting this out to people, I'm willing to do the embarrassing thing of spelling in public. Like, that's my worst fear right there. When I wrote my book, and I wrote my best-selling book. Let's see if we can actually see that here. If you look at it, it's not that big. You go on Amazon, you get it for $19.97. Be the best $19.97 you ever spent on a relationship communication book. But it took me probably 6 months to write it, 6 years to edit it. Why? I'm not a writer. It's an act of love. It's a courageous act. I was courageously vulnerable. And each time I go to spell in front of you, like, I can start working up the sweat. Why do I do it? Because I'm committed to you and me having a breakthrough. So what I'd love to hear is, what have you gotten so far? And a breakthrough is when something becomes possible that wasn't possible before. So I'd love to see some comments about what you got so far. And moving forward, do you want to cut a trail or follow a path? Because now it's a chance for you, as Tony Robbins said, to turn decades into days. And here's some other Tony quotes. Courage does not mean that you're not afraid. It means that you're afraid and do it anyway. And that is Tony. And that is me when I had more hair. So let's see if I can get a picture where you can see. Yeah, you can see. The other thing that Tony said is that courage, like a fear, is a habit. The more you do it, the more you can do it. And this habit of stepping up, of taking action more than anything else, will move you in a different direction. So what's the payoff for being courageous, for stepping up, for taking on your relationship? Well, this couple here, super successful couple, Melodia and Ian, run their own company. They've been together for years. They wanted to get married, but they didn't have, their communication kept falling apart. And we worked with them for probably about 6 months. And this picture right here is at their wedding. Now, their idea of a great wedding, which I totally loved, was they were in Arizona. They rented hot springs. It was sort of a Burning Man meets hot springs wedding. And this is what she had to say. I was desperate for better communication with my beloved. We felt like cats and dogs trying to get along and understand each other. The course gave us the tools, language, and infrastructure we both successfully use. We now have a fresh breath of possibility for our future, and we feel a new level of intimacy, love, and that is deeply, deeply fulfilling and exciting. There we go. So if this is interesting to you, here's a possible next step. Go to Argue Less, Love More. There's 3 things that are going to happen if you do that. 1, you can watch a video, a 15-minute video. It's nails down 3 big issues that everybody should know about in relationship. Number 2, it will give you the link that you can get a free copy of my ebook, my book, The Argue Less, Love More, will send to you automatically in an ebook. And the third thing is you can schedule a breakthrough session with me, about 15 to 30 minutes. And what we do is get clear where you are, where you want to go, what's in the way. So the best thing I learned here, is that vulnerability rather than fear, well, I want to be careful. It's the opposite side of courage, that it's their courage and vulnerability are the opposite sides of the same coin. So it's not the opposite of courage, it's the opposite side of courage. So there's no courage without vulnerability. And that really resonates with me. I was struggling with courage because I'm afraid to be vulnerable. Thanks for sharing this tidbit. Yeah. Thank you. And nobody wants to be weak. And if you want to have love, you're going to be vulnerable. You're going to get your heart broken. Now, what happens? You click on the link. It will take you here. You can, when you sign up, put your name and email. You can get a free copy of my book. I'm not going to email. Oh my. I'm not going to email you a lot. I'm just going to email you a little bit. And then the next step is you can schedule an appointment. After you've watched the video, you can schedule an appointment, and we'll spend some time together. There'll be some questions there that will help me. Anyway, thank you so much. I totally appreciate all of you for joining me. It's been an amazing evening. It's time for me to go. Thank you for your input. By the way, if there's anybody that you think that could get something from this, please, there'll be a replay link here. You can send them the replay, and I will talk to you later. Have a great evening.